Do you ever feel like your life is just a big puzzle where you get these pieces that don't really fit together, but you're just kind of jamming in there to make them fit? Or are those times in which you feel like maybe you're missing some important pieces? Or just those times in which the pieces of the puzzle just seem so overwhelming and you'll never be able to get it together properly? Well, if you've ever felt that way, or if you're feeling that way today, stick around, and I'm glad that you joined me. Dr. John Morrison, the founder of Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana, said this. He said, "Knowledge is the ability to take things apart. Wisdom is the ability to put things together." And that's what you and I need. We need wisdom to put the puzzle pieces together. Every Christmas, my family buys a puzzle, and from Christmas, usually past New Year's and sometimes long into January, we spend our free time putting this puzzle together. I have to admit that most of the work is done by my wife, Beth. But there's all kinds of different puzzles in the world. Sometimes there's those really simple puzzles that are just the wooden cutouts that just go together very easily and simply. There's more difficult puzzles that include 1,000 or even 1,500 pieces. And then there's puzzles that are almost just impossible. I think about the Ravensburger puzzle that is 18,000 pieces. And once completed, the puzzle is 8 feet by 6 feet in size. And there's a guy who has a picture that it took him almost 5 months to complete this Ravensburger puzzle. There's the gray Malin puzzle, which is only 500 pieces, but what makes this puzzle almost impossible is that there is a picture on both sides of the puzzle when it is completed. Then there is the Mandikari puzzle, which is 1,000 pieces, but what makes it almost impossible is that it's just one solid color, either black or white. And then there is the impossible puzzle that's called the impossible puzzle. And it's almost impossible because all of the pieces of this 1,000 piece puzzle are all the same size and all the same shape. What makes it even more difficult is there are no edge pieces to help get you started. And by the way, when the puzzle is fully put together, there are 5 pieces left over that go nowhere in the puzzle. And sometimes life feels that way, doesn't it? But even more difficult, it's not just life's not just a 750 or 1,000 or a 500 piece puzzle. Life many times is millions of pieces that we need to put together effectively. And in order to do that, you and I need wisdom. Now, this series that I'm beginning today is called Wisdom for Life, and we're going to look through the pages of Proverbs over the next few weeks, and we're going to see how you and I can put the pieces of life together effectively by the wisdom that God has offered to us. Because the truth is that every wise person recognizes that just like a puzzle, all of life is connected. You see, a wise person recognizes and understands that my present one day is going to be my past, which is going to impact my future either positively or negatively. I just want you to think about the times in your life when you made unwise decisions and just the mess that you made in your life. Or the unwise decisions that created a mess in someone else's life. Or even the unwise and foolish decisions that someone else made that created a mess in your life. Because all of us have these regrets. And when you think back to your biggest regrets, and that regret may be related to money, that regret may be related to a relationship, that regret may be related to your family. But whatever it is, your greatest regret, I think if you were to look back at that regret, that leading up to that regret was a series of unwise decisions. And looking back on it, you and I look back and we say, well, how could I have been so dumb? Or why was I so blind? How was it that I acted that foolishly? Because here is the truth about wisdom, is that wisdom does not reside in the land where there's hard and fast rules, where everything's just black and white, yes or no, good and bad. Wisdom resides in that gray area where there are no hard and fast rules. You see, wisdom resides in those areas where we ask the questions, should I? Should I take the job? Should I make that purchase? Should I enter into this relationship where there are no hard and fast rules, but we need wisdom in order to put those pieces together effectively? And so in this series, and in today's message in particular, I want to give you this take-home truth, is that when wisdom is found, life will abound. What you're going to discover over the next several weeks as I go through this series is that when you act wisely, you're going to discover that your life will flourish. You will flourish relationally, you'll flourish emotionally, you'll flourish financially, you'll even flourish spiritually when you act wisely. And Solomon understood the truth of that statement, that when wisdom is found, life will abound. And it led Solomon, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, to write the book of Proverbs. And the book of Proverbs is filled with some really extremely practical instructions for life. But even though it's extremely practical, the book of Proverbs is not simplistic, or is it not just merely moralistic. The whole purpose of Proverbs that Solomon wrote was to encourage heart and life change in our lives. Now, the book of Proverbs was written by the wisest man to ever live outside of Jesus. His name was Solomon, and Solomon was the son of King David. You know, David that killed the giant and became the king over the nation, and Solomon was David's son. And early on in Solomon's reign as king, God came to Solomon. He said, Solomon, because your father David has found favor in my eyes, whatever you ask of me, I will grant to you. In 1 Chronicles chapter 1, Solomon asked God for wisdom. And God gave Solomon great wisdom and great understanding of the world and life. And throughout Proverbs, 122 different times, Solomon either writes about wisdom or wrote about how you and I can acquire wisdom. Because Solomon understood that all of us need wisdom for life. Now, at the end of this message, I'm going to give you a question. A question that I think that if you will ask honestly in your life, it'll give you direction and help you to put the pieces together effectively in your life. It's a question that, if asked sincerely, will give you the answer to all the other questions that you face in life. A question that, if you will ask it repeatedly, it will allow you to live life wisely, because when wisdom is found, life will abound. Now, we're going to start today in this series in Proverbs chapter 4. And here in Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon shares just the importance of you and I to get wisdom. I want to begin reading in chapter 4, verse 1. He said, "Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching." Can you see the urgency in Solomon's words here? He says, listen, my sons, pay attention and gain understanding. Do not forsake my teachings. That word forsake was a word that Solomon used that literally meant to let go of something, or to leave something behind, or to abandon something. And what Solomon is saying to his sons, he says, guys, I want you to listen. I want you to pay attention. I don't want you to let go of these words. I don't want them to slip out of your hand. I don't want you to forget them and leave them behind. I don't want you to abandon what I'm about to tell you, because it's so important. And he goes on in verse 3, and Solomon said, when I was a boy in my father's house, still tender and an only child of my mother, he taught me and said, lay hold of my words with all your heart. Now Solomon wrote this, he's the son of David, and at this age in Solomon's life as the only child, still young, only child of his mother, this would have been coming off the heels of David making some very foolish, some very reckless decisions in his life. And David learned the truth about these things, learned some things in some very hard ways. And so what David is saying to Solomon, Solomon, I learned these things the hard way. I don't want you to have to learn them the same way. So I'm passing these things on to you, and I want you to hold on to them. And Solomon in turn held on to his sons, and he wants them, and by extension you and I, to hold on to them as well, because when wisdom is found, life will abound. So the first thing that Solomon shows us here is the value of wisdom. If you look in verse 5, he says, get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. If you jump down to verse 7, he says, wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. In these two verses, 4 different times, Solomon emphasizes the fact, get wisdom. Now that word get, it means to acquire or to obtain or to purchase something. And here he says, I want you to obtain, I want you to get wisdom. I want you to get it. Have you ever met those people in your life and they just don't seem to get it? Right? They see the same things that you see. They experience the same things that you experience. They hear and they listen to the same things that you hear and listen to. But they just are unable to put the pieces together, and they continue to make the same foolish and reckless decisions over and over and over again. It's because they don't get it. And here Solomon is saying, I want you to get it, because wisdom is valuable. Because if you look at verse 7, he begins there, wisdom is supreme. Now you may have a version of the Bible that says this is the beginning of wisdom, because that word supreme can mean the start or the beginning of something. But it's a word that also meant to be most important, or to be the chief, or to be the choicest part. So I think supreme is probably the best way to translate that word. And so he says, wisdom is supreme. Therefore, because it's so valuable, because it's supreme, get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Here Solomon is telling his sons, he's telling you and I, whatever you have to sacrifice, whatever it costs you, get wisdom, because it's so valuable. It's more valuable than knowledge. It's more valuable than experience. It's more valuable than skills. Get wisdom. Think about how much money we spend on those other things. As important as they are, think about how much money we spend on acquiring knowledge. I have a daughter right now in college, and every month I got to pay college tuition. It's very expensive for her to obtain knowledge. Think about the money that we spend in order to obtain skills through training programs or trade schools or internships. Think about the money that's spent so that you and I can gain experience. And as valuable as those things are, Solomon says wisdom is even more valuable. Wisdom is supreme. I heard a story about a boy named Neil. And Neil had an intellectual disability. He wasn't the most knowledgeable kid in his class. He wasn't the most skillful kid in his class. And so as a result, like kids at that age, he was picked on many times in school. And one of the things that his classmates would love to do to him was they would take a dime and a nickel, and they would offer them to Neil. And they'd say, Neil, would you like this little dime, or would you like this big nickel? And every time, Neil would take the nickel. And all of his classmates would laugh at him and make fun of him. And one day, they offered him the choice between the little dime and the big nickel. And again, Neil took the nickel, and they walked away laughing. And Neil's friend saw everything that had happened. He walked up to Neil and he said, Neil, why do you do that? Don't you know a dime is worth twice as much as a nickel? Why don't you take the dime? And Neil said, shh, be quiet. Because if I take the dime, they'll stop giving me money. You see, that's wisdom. And wisdom is more valuable. It's supreme to knowledge. It's more valuable than experience. It's more valuable than skills. Though it cost all that you have, get wisdom. Wisdom is supreme. Though it cost all that you have, get wisdom. Over in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 11, Solomon wrote these words. He said, wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Here, Solomon is saying, if you're offered wealth and wisdom, take wisdom every time, because wisdom is supreme. And the whole reason wisdom is so valuable is because of the benefits of wisdom. And what Solomon does here is he gives you and I 3 benefits of wisdom. Now, this is not an exhaustive list because the benefits of wisdom are just numerous. But these 3 benefits, I think, are preeminent benefits of wisdom. And the first one is this. He says that the first benefit of wisdom is that wisdom brings life. If you jump back up to the end of verse 4, he wrote there, he said, keep my commands and you will live. Now, there's a lot of discussion among commentators as to what Solomon is actually talking about. Is he talking about you will live and your life will be prolonged? Or is he talking about you will live and your life will be prosperous? And my answer to that is yes. Just think with me for a second. If you and I act wisely, will it not prolong our days? Right? If we act wisely, wisdom will keep us from the dangerous, the reckless, the foolish decisions of life. And as a result, our life will be prolonged. But it also that can mean that wisdom will allow us to live prosperously. Because if you live wisely, you will prosper. Now, it may not always be financially, but I will guarantee you that if you will live wisely, you will prosper relationally, you will prosper emotionally. If you live wisely, you will prosper spiritually. You will prosper in so many different areas of life, and yes, maybe even financially. Look at what Solomon wrote in chapter 3, verse 16. He says this. He's talking about wisdom, and he says, long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Here, Solomon answers that question. He says, if you live wisely, it will prolong your days on one hand, and it will make your days prosperous on the other hand. So live wisely. One of the first benefit of wisdom is that wisdom brings life. And when wisdom is found, life will abound. He goes on, and the second benefit is he says that wisdom brings security. If you jump down to verse 6, he says, do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Don't let go of wisdom. Don't abandon wisdom. Don't leave wisdom behind. And if you will not forsake wisdom, she will protect you. Now, that word that Solomon used for protect was a word that was used in his day to plant a hedge around something, either your garden or your house or something like that. And it was to act as a barrier, almost as a guardrail. Think about guardrails that we have along the highway. The guardrail is not in the danger zone, but the guardrail keeps us from ending up in the danger zone. And I think the reason why Solomon wrote this is that he knew the tendency of the human heart. Because our tendency is to push the limit as far as we can without getting into the danger zone. Like, how close can I get without getting into danger? My son Holden got his learner's permit a couple months ago. And a few weeks after getting his learner's permit, we were driving on the highway, and he said, "Dad, how fast can I go above the speed limit?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Holden, the speed limit is the speed limit. And he said, no, Dad, you don't understand. How fast can I go above the speed limit before a police officer will stop me? You see, that's the tendency of the human heart. How much can I push the limit without getting in trouble? And that's the wrong question we are asking. When we live wisely, it will protect us from danger. Because Solomon knew, right? And you know, and I know, that oftentimes we are our own worst enemy. And wisdom will keep us from danger. But then he goes on. He says in verse 6, do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Now that word watch over was a word that was used in Solomon's day for a guard that would be in a watchtower, a guard tower, and that person would be looking out to make sure that the enemy was not attacking. And here Solomon says the same thing. He says, yes, sometimes wisdom will keep us from danger, and there are times in which wisdom will keep danger from us. Those people around us that are foolish and unwise, he says wisdom will keep us from the danger that they will bring into our lives. Wisdom is valuable because it brings security. And when wisdom is found, life will abound. And then the third benefit that Solomon tells us here that comes with wisdom is that wisdom will bring honor. If you look in verse 8, he says, esteem her and she will exalt you. Embrace her and she will honor you. When you hold on to wisdom, when you live wisely, it will allow you to live an honorable and attractive life. He says in verse 9, she will set a garland of grace on your head and present you with a crown of splendor. Here he says that when you and I live wisely, we are transformed by wisdom. Because he said it will place a garland on your head, a crown of splendor on you. Think about what a crown does. A crown transforms the person. A crown transforms a competitor into a champion. A crown transforms an ordinary citizen into royalty. And here he says wisdom will do the same thing for you and I. And I want you to just think about the wisest people that you have met in your life. And those wise people are honorable people. They're people who are honored because of their wisdom, because those people have discovered that when wisdom is found, life will abound. So, because that is true, what should we do? And it's very simple. You and I are to live wisely. But how do we live wisely? How do we really apply this to our lives? Well, the question I want to give to you, the question that if you will ask this question, it'll give you the ability to make wise decisions. This question, if you ask it honestly, will help you to put all of the pieces together effectively. This question that I'm going to give you, if you will ask it, it will guide you in just the day-to-day living of life. And this is the question. What is the wise thing for me to do? What is the wise thing for me to do? When you're faced with decisions in your life and there's no clear right or wrong, ask, what is the wise thing for me to do? When you are weighing all the options that are in front of you and you have to make a choice, ask yourself, what is the wise thing for me to do? When you're faced with a purchase or a promotion or entering into a partnership, ask yourself the question, what is the wise thing for me to do? You see, wise people understand this truth, that just because it's not wrong doesn't make it all right. Because there are some things in life that may not be wrong, but they may not be wise. And the wise person is going to ask the question, what is the wise thing for me to do? If it's not wrong, it may not be all right, but is it the wise thing for me to do? Because again, think about this, the genesis of all of the biggest regrets of your life. If you would trace back far enough, you would encounter a moment where you made a decision where it wasn't necessarily wrong, but it wasn't the wise thing for you to do. And when you put a series of unwise decisions together, it's going to lead to great regret. So as you ask that question, I think you need to ask it from three different perspectives: from your past, your present, and your future. When you think about all of your past experiences, ask yourself, in light of all the past events and past experiences of my life, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, here's the tricky part of this. It's not just the things that you have done in the past, but maybe the things that have been done to you in the past. In light of those experiences, in light of those events, what is the wise thing for me to do? And there are some events that have happened in my past that today I just make the decision not to do some social activities in my life, just simply because of past events and experiences in my life. It's just not wise for me to do those things. So in light of my past events and experiences, what is the wise thing for me to do? Secondly, in light of my present circumstances and situation, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, this really has a lot to do with our present emotions, our present circumstances, even just the stage of life in which we find ourselves. I think about the person who's offered a promotion, and just having to navigate that. Is it wrong to take the promotion? No. But if you're a parent who's got maybe some little ones at the house and you know this promotion is going to cause you to be away from home more or to work more hours, you need to ask yourself, is this the wise thing for me to do right now? Or maybe you just got out of a relationship that just ended, or you just have a marriage that has just ended. Is it wrong for you to jump back into another relationship right away? It's not wrong, but you need to ask yourself, right, is this the wise thing for me to do? What's the wise thing for me to do in light of my past events and experiences, in light of my present circumstances and situations? What is the wise thing for me to do? And then the third aspect in which we need to ask this is, in light of my future dreams and hopes, what is the wise thing for me to do? If I look down the road 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years from now, and what are my dreams? In light of those dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do today? Like maybe one of your dreams is to buy a house in the near future. And you know, you want to buy this house, but you have to make a decision on, do I want to buy this $49,000 Dodge Ram pickup truck? Now, is it a sin to buy a pickup truck? Well, yes, if it was a Ford or a Chevy, but not necessarily. But in light of you wanting to buy a house, is this the wise thing for you to do today? Another area is if you're a student and maybe you want to get an A in the class or make the dean's list this semester, and it's Friday night and your friends, your classmates, your roommates come by and they ask you if you want to go to this party or go hang out here, but you got this big test that's coming up. You need to ask yourself, in light of my hopes, in light of my dreams, is this the wise thing for me to do? So in light of my past events and experiences, in light of my present circumstances and situations, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, a couple caveats there. Number one, what is the wise thing for me to do? Because here's the truth. Things that may be unwise for me may not necessarily be unwise for you. And the things that are unwise for you may not necessarily be the things that are unwise for me. What is the wise thing for me to do? And also, just because it's unwise today may not mean it's unwise in the future. And so oftentimes I look at that, what's the wise thing for me to do? And then I remind myself, no today, but maybe not forever. So what is the wise thing for me to do today? And it may just be today, but it may not be forever. Just learn to ask yourself the question, what is the wise thing for me to do? Because when wisdom is found, life will abound. But when it comes to wisdom, you have a choice. You can either choose wisdom or you can decide not to choose wisdom. And if you decide not to choose wisdom, we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more next week, you're going to see some of the great devastating effects of not choosing wisely. But godly wisdom comes first of all by a choice to submit and follow Jesus Christ. When you make the decision to submit your life to Jesus, and when you make the decision to follow after Jesus, that is the first step in wisdom. Solomon wrote that here in Proverbs. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. The beginning of wisdom is submitting yourself and deciding to follow Jesus, because whichever decision you make, to choose wisdom or not to choose wisdom, it's going to cost you something. But which decision is going to get you where you want to be? So, if it's time for you to make a change, maybe you're desiring to turn the corner, or to turn the page, or maybe you're just desirous of having life and security and honor, begin to ask yourself, what is the wise thing for me to do? And I know that you will be glad that you did. Because when wisdom is found, life will abound. It happened just about a year ago. Last fall, I went on a backpacking trip with a friend. And we were backpacking, and near the end of the backpacking trip, we came to this scenic overlook. And you could actually go down this little slope and out onto a rock that was out over the gorge, overlooking the gorge. And there were no signs that told us we could not go down there, and there was no barriers that we had to climb over, and so we were free to go down to this lookout. But I didn't go down because it wasn't the wise thing for me to do. You know, in light of my past, I'm kind of a clumsy person, and I didn't want to trip and fall and roll over that rock and end up in the bottom of the gorge. So in light of my past experiences, it wasn't the wise thing for me to do. It had rained all day the day before, and that slope going down to the rock was slippery. The rock that was sticking out over the canyon, it was wet and probably slippery. And so in light of my present circumstances, I didn't think it was the wise thing to do. And I want to grow old and see my children grow into adulthood and maybe even see grandchildren. And so in light of my future hopes and dreams, I didn't think it was the wise thing for me to do. Now, if I go back again, it may not be unwise for me to go down onto that rock. But that day, I asked myself, what is the wise thing for me to do? And what I discovered was that when wisdom is found, life will abound. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the wisdom that it contains. And as we go through this series, God, I might ask ourselves the question, what is the wise thing for me to do? We ask you to fill us with your wisdom. We ask you to allow us to walk wisely for your glory. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks for joining me today.